to defend Tony.
The island of Puerto Rico should go on Are You Garbage?
You son of a... That's the last. We gotta remove that from the internet.
No, I love Puerto Rico. San Juan,
no,
baby.
I'm kidding. That's the Tony joke.
What a wild.
The thing is that joke was based on his need to, like, he gets freaked out about the environment. He gets freaked out about the pollution patch.
While he's in a throne.
We were super high. We were super high in the green room. And
In the regular world.
He's like, how long have there been plastic? There's only been plastic for 6 years. It's bigger than in Texas. It's in the, and so he starts getting obsessed by garbage. And then he finds out about Puerto Rico. And so then he comes up with this joke. There's an island of garbage. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And it's like, but the joke was actually out of his concern that Puerto Rico is being smothered by garbage. He actually loves Puerto Rico.
He's trying to protect our parks.
He's just a retard. He's just a retard.
He's a male Greta Thunberg.
People don't know the whole backstory to that joke.
It's
they
so
know that's a joke about Puerto Rico. You're doing it at a Trump rally.
You should have defended him. You should have come out and just been like, he's retarded.
That would be the right way to say it. I kind of did. I mean, I basically said that. Like, this is where it came from. Like, Tony's just, he's a insult comic. He's the best insult comic in the country. If you want to watch that roast, watch that Tom Brady roast.
Oh, it's so funny watching Jon Stewart go like that. That's just our world.
He's easy to hate.
That's true.
Especially if you don't know him.
He's trying.
He's trying to get hated. He likes being hated. He's a villain in a pro wrestling
show.
He's
a heel, and the heels went wide, and it became a different vibe.
And by the way, I completely understand the support Joe Rogan wanting to defend his friends, of course, but this was way beyond him wanting to defend or side with Tony, and it does come across as him being delusional because when it comes to stand-up comedy, you know, having bad sets or having somebody talk bad about something that you did, it's kind of normal. It's part of the business, and it's not the end of the world. But the way that Joe Rogan is going out of his way to defend Tony, again, it doesn't really make that much sense unless, of course, he is simply just trying to protect Tony's ego, which would be insane. Or what makes more sense is that potentially, you know, they're trying to save a deal that was in the works for Tony. And since this whole thing is a bad look for Tony, you know, they're trying to rewrite the narrative or explain to everyone what actually happened, because when it comes to professional stand-up comedians, you know, it is a horrible look. There's no excuse. I mean, just like a pro athlete knows the basics of their sport, like aiming at the goal, a professional comedian should know the basics of how to set up a joke. They should know that context is important, and also they should be aware that performing comedy at a political rally could be very risky and not the best idea. But also, Joe Rogan's and Tony's explanation doesn't just miss the point, but it treats the audience too dumb to get it, when in reality the problem was that Tony wasn't that funny. I mean, it would be like if a football coach was watching their kicker miss the ball and send it to the parking lot, but then turns around and tells the whole team and everyone, well, you see, in reality, the kicker was very concerned about nutrition and health in the country, and so he's aiming for the food stand or whatever. But everyone is missing the point and the message. I mean, that would be insane, but that is essentially what Joe Rogan is doing when he's using the excuse that Tony was concerned for the environment, and that's why he made the word about Puerto Rico.
Well, I'll hear this. People would say, is there any line for you? I would not use a racial slur. I would not use an anti-gay slur, and I will talk about, I will make gay jokes, I will make racial jokes. But it's, I think once you use the slur, I think you're dead in the water. I've thrown comics under the bus for using slurs before. Because I just think it's got no business in stand-up comedy. So I would never do that. I wouldn't call it a line, because I'd be happy to talk about these subjects. We have to do it in a smart way. Again, you want people laughing, not just, like, that can't be all there is. It's got to be laughing.
No, it can't be provocative for the sake of provoking. You're trying to get people to feel and think something different.
And if you're provocative for the sake of being provocative, which again, okay, you can't complain about it. You can't be provocative for the sake of being provocative and be like, why aren't you laughing? You guys don't get it. Like, that's what embarrasses me about modern stand-up comedy, is the complaining from people who are just so clearly trying to do it.
So you get bothered by the comedians that are complaining about what the present climate is?
I'm embarrassed by it. That's I don't. It doesn't bother me so much. I mean, it just feels like, why are we complaining? Comics are making more money than they've ever made before. This comedy boom is insane. That is Netflix money. Touring is huge, and people are just complaining all the time, and I can't stand it.
And why is that happening?
I think because they've gotten more money and more attention is on them, and they don't like negative attention. It's like if you want 1 million people to see your special, 100,000 aren't going to like it. And you have to be okay with that. You got 1 million people to watch it. People have forgotten about that. They just don't want to hear any negative complaint, or they use it as a marketing tool. If the PC culture is trying to stop me, you better buy tickets to my show. And I think that's embarrassing.
Now, when it comes to stand-up comics complaining about cancel culture or censorship, I do agree that it's an annoying thing to complain about, especially because for the past couple of years, it hasn't been an issue. And even if it was, funny enough, you know, when it comes to stand-up comedy, it is one of the few industries in which, regardless of what happens, the artist or the comedian can still manage to get on stage and make a good living. And so when it comes to Tony and the Rogan sphere, because they have the mothership, it is nearly impossible for them to get canceled or, you know, censored. But it seems like what Tony really wants is to be able to make all the money in the world, get all the fame and attention while just putting out lazy comedy. Now, to be fair, I do think that Tony has that skill to come up with good comedy and be a good writer. And he used to write for Comedy Central, the Comedy Central Roast. But lately, it does seem like he's just been relying on lazy comedy because, for example, nobody's talking about Tony's random comedy sets that he uploaded to X, which was essentially Tony just complaining and desperately trying to explain why he had to do that joke and how it was just shitty material, and also how he really took an L and came out on top because he went off on this overweight lady. I mean, it's dumb. Now, some people will say that it was just a random improvised set, no big deal, but even a lot of his own fans are saying how it wasn't the best material or even that good at all, which is, you know, it is weird, but to me, you know, after watching that special, to me, it became very clear that Tony wasn't really worried about putting out the best comedy and being, and he wasn't really worried about the art form, like he mentioned in the past.
But it's all about the art for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I like looking ahead at what's next and things like that. Like,
and instead, he's just trying to save his reputation as being that one comedian from the Roast of Tom Brady on Netflix. Now, it is a little bit strange that no other comedian or big podcaster is talking about this whole situation, at least not from what I've seen, besides, obviously, who Anthony has been talking to. And so I wonder if Joe Rogan or Tony Hinchcliffe will respond, because so far it's only been the Legion of Skanks comedians who have reacted to this whole thing, and I thought their perspective or their reaction was very, very interesting.
Do you think he's going after edgy comedians, or does it just sound like he's going after them until he delivers his punchline? Exactly the opposite of what you thought.
Yeah, maybe nobody listened to the second half of this interview where he switches it to the accent.
Like this for a while there.
You guys have beef with Anthony?
No. Anthony does not like any other edgy comedians. He wants to be the only edgy comedian out there.
One, I think he's hilarious. I think he's a great comic.
Yeah, as far as like left turn jokes, he's like tops. He's the best.
He's great.
Yeah, I mean, so apparently, I don't exactly know. I didn't watch a bunch of it. I know that there's been sort of going online. Is people talk? I guess Anthony took a shot at Joe Rogan in the podcast that was in the special. I didn't hear. Which I heard the joke. It's really not. Like people are.
It's a misdirect joke.
It's just a bit. That's all.
It's in the set.
It's in the special. Yeah.
What do you think about cancel culture? So let me be clear. I don't give a about cancel culture. What I am sick of are comedians complaining about cancel culture. It's not that hard. Do your job.
Hey, don't laugh at him.
Comedians.
So far, what we're trying to put a report right now.
No. They're taking C.
Don't you dare. Hold on.
So far, I'm just enjoying it. I know. Damn it, dude.
Let me say this too. I watched the special. It's very, very good.
Oh,
no, he's a good comic.
I bet. I'm going to text Anthony after this. I watched your special, Legion of Skanks. It's great.
Now, the reason why the Legion of Skanks reaction was so interesting is because they technically had all the excuses and the reasons to attack Anthony. You know, they've had beef in the past. Anthony has called them out in the past. And, you know, they're cool with Joe Rogan, and they were on the podcast very recently. but they always seem to side with comedy because, for example, even back then when Brendan Schaub was heavily protected by Joe Rogan, Luis J. Gomez was one of the few, if not the only comedian who would openly make fun of Brendan Schaub and reference the Fighter and the Kid subreddit on his show. And whenever other Rogan Sphere comedians would be on the panel, you could tell they were uncomfortable and afraid that would eventually get back to Brendan Schaub and then Joe Rogan. And now that we have Joe Rogan versus Anthony, again, it seems like they're siding with real comedy because even though at the beginning of the clip, they were jokingly trying to trash Anthony, then at the end of the clip, they find out that Anthony wasn't just taking shots and talking shit, but instead, he was actually performing great comedy and good jokes. Because, for example, some people were commenting saying that it was actually Cat Williams, the first one to call out the Rogan Sphere. And although it's kind of true, I mean, he was the first massive comedian to acknowledge that Joe Rogan pushes the same 6 unfunny comedians or whatever. Technically, Anthony has been doing it a lot longer. And also, the big difference is that, now looking back, it does seem like Cat Williams was just doing that to promote his new comedy special because he ended up going on Joe Rogan's podcast and didn't really call him out on anything. But if you compare that to Anthony, he didn't want to go on Joe Rogan's podcast and instead did a lot of other smaller shows and still killed it on his comedy special and made fun of Joe Rogan.
I like Joe. Joe's my friend. Joe's a good guy. But if you listen to his podcast, you're a loser. My brother-in-law is Joe Rogan's biggest fan. Never misses an episode, doesn't think 4 hours is long enough. My brother-in-law is Joe Rogan's fan. But I can't argue with him. He's a paramedic.
Great. Yeah, edit this all. Edit every piece of this podcast right now. This is ridiculous. We're trying to trash Anthony Jeselnik for attacking Joe and Tony. You're not understanding the point.
You can't do it with the actual comedy.
God damn it. We should have...
This is podcast fodder.
There was a middle part in there where we would have gotten at him, but you guys put all the punchlines together. That worked out.
Maybe if you guys weren't laughing so hard, we could have heard the unfunny parts.
I think there's probably some in there that sucks, right? I think I agree with the audience. It was so tight, the economy of words was mesmerizing.
We can't wait for you to have Anthony Jeselnik on the podcast.
I'd love to have him on.
We would love to have him on.
I thought the Brady roast was a big moment, even though I think those jokes were hack as hell.
This is all
behind criminals.
Hopefully.
Controlling Bravo.
So when I ask him later how he's thinking about the comedy after Trump's election win, he says that his job is the same whether it's raining or shining. Everything is an opportunity. His opinion of Hinchcliffe remains unchanged. He is a troll basking in the shadow of Joe Rogan.
To be fair, Joe Rogan's shadow is pretty tiny.
There is no...
He's a small guy. He's not a big guy.
It's wider than tall.
Yeah, it is wide.
And so, with that said, I don't think Anthony comes from a place of jealousy, as many people mentioned. And instead, it's, he's just doing what a comedian does, calling out the status quo and the mainstream media. Because, like it or not, at this point, Joe Rogan is the mainstream. I mean, there's no denying that. It's insane. And once again, I wonder if Joe Rogan or Tony or Andrew or Tim Dillon will respond to Anthony Jeselnik. It will be very interesting because this will be the test, the real test, to see if they can actually exchange with a comedian, with another legit comedian, because most of the Rogan Sphere comedians have been in a bubble, in a very protected bubble, in Austin, in the mothership, and also by being friends with Joe Rogan. And the only time that they really dunk on people or come out on top is whenever they do their own shows or their friends' podcasts, never out in the wild. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. Dislike if you didn't like the video. But that is all we have for today. See ya.
Several months of my life. So his response to that was to say, come on, and try and pressure me into it.
She's like trying to frame this like fucking rape or something, to say come on and try and pressure you into it. Yeah, because you had organized a talk with another streamer at a specific time and you bailed 18 minutes before, after they'd already gone live in anticipation. And you didn't even give me like a good reason for it. What do you expect? You expect me to be like, oh, okay, you're drunk. I guess we can't talk. I guess I'll just turn off my stream. You know, no big deal. It's incredible that she's going for the victim angle.
There's a lot of conflicting information out there about what's going on in Xinjiang, China, and the alleged oppression of some of its ethnic minority populations, predominantly Uyghurs. So I'm going to try to sift through it all and get to the bottom of what's really going on there. A very important thing about this whole debate is that most of the people involved in it don't genuinely care about the people of Xinjiang at all. So they're more than happy to uncritically peddle whatever bullshit just happens to suit their wider agenda. And your perceptions have undoubtedly already been influenced by some of this very bullshit. On one end, there's this new breed of grifters who'll tell you absolutely nothing but how great China's government is. For them, nothing bad is happening at all. It's all just nothing but lies. The Chinese government is simply helping these 100% willing participants in education programs. Every single testimony to the contrary comes from a paid crisis actor who has also had nanomachines implanted in their bloodstream by the CIA, FBI, NED, and the State Department. After all, that's what a diverse array of Chinese state media agencies said, and uncritically trusting what a government tells you about its own actions is definitely not sus. They've got a small but very enthusiastic and vocal niche of campus supporters so desperate to believe that there can be such a thing as a good and benevolent world superpower that they're more than willing to allow themselves to be gaslighted by anyone who'll tell them exactly that. And on the other end, there's a bunch of possibly even more cynical people. They come from all across the political spectrum. Right, left, and center. On the left, there's those who, regardless of how much they deny it, still see the world as a clash between the civilized West and the barbarous East. So they talk endlessly about China's crimes, happily exaggerating and being completely uncritical with their sources, while ignoring or downplaying the far more severe and far more frequent crimes that their countries engage in globally, which they themselves could also do far more about, and yet which they only seem to acknowledge performatively in passing, if at all. Sure, the USA still has concentration camps for kids, but at least the camps are a bit nicer now. Could you imagine one of them making a video like that, but for China? I sure couldn't. For them, the suffering of Turkic minorities in Xinjiang is nothing more than ammo to be used against the world power, who they see as representative of the barbarous Eastern hordes, who, lamentably of course, can only be contained through the continued geopolitical dominance of the civilized West, regardless of how many wars they start, dictators they install, and genocides they support. Then on the right and in the center, you've got people who are at least more honest about it. They also only pretend to care about the oppression in Xinjiang for those same reasons, but at least they just come out and say it. At home, they don't give a shit about minorities at best, or actively demonize them at worst, yet now suddenly we're supposed to believe that they genuinely care about the plight of minorities in a country on the other side of the world that they know absolutely nothing about beyond it bad and we good, while curiously either having nothing to say or outright approving of the similar things that their own countries do, especially to Muslims. And their hearts are genuinely bleeding for Xinjiang? Get the f*** out of here. For what unfortunately seems to be most people, there is just no such thing as a consistently applied set of principles, especially when it comes to issues involving their chosen camp's perceived enemies. All of them have pre-existing conclusions and pre-existing positions. It's China, therefore it's bad, or it's China, therefore it's good. If you're one of those people, then this might not be the video for you. I'm not going to be coddling either side here. There are bad things happening in Xinjiang. China is not a benevolent, anti-imperialist state that doesn't oppress any of its people. Happy 9th birthday to those of you who think that it is, by the way. But nor is anything remotely on the level of like the Holocaust going on. So what I'm going to do here is sift through the propaganda and try to form a picture of what's actually going on. To do this, I'm primarily going to be using sources directly from the Chinese government itself, since, you know, it's kind of impossible possible to call those a CIA forgery, alongside some credible eyewitness reports from the minorities themselves. And for each and every source, I'm going to explain why I think they're credible, rather than just presenting them uncritically as fact. I'm also going to be dissecting examples of propaganda from both sides as I go along. This video is going to get me plenty of comments calling me a State Department CIA shill. It's also going to get me comments calling me a genocide denier or a China stan, and I'm totally fine with that. Let's get going. Firstly, some important historical context. Xinjiang is a province in China's north that is the home of the Uyghur people, a majority Muslim group of Turkic people who have their own language and culture. It's also home to other Turkic minorities who are often forgotten, for example, Kazakhs and Uzbeks. These groups are also mostly Muslim and are also allegedly being victimized by China's policies in the province. Xinjiang has been a part of China, at least in name, since the 1700s. There's been a few rebellions in this period, two of which resulted in the short-lived proclamation of a state called East Turkestan. Then, after the communists won the Chinese Civil War, Xinjiang was integrated into the People's Republic of China, and in 1955, it was officially proclaimed as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, acknowledging its special status as a kind of nation within a nation. Up until the late 70s and early 80s, there wasn't that much more unrest in Xinjiang, but after the death of Mao Zedong, this changed. The government began focusing on developing Xinjiang's north, which led to a large influx of Han Chinese immigrants, who today make up the majority of the population in the province's richest areas, such as in its capital, Urumqi. This made some Uyghurs feel like they were being left behind and discriminated against in favor of these more recent arrivals, since most Uyghurs live in the south of the province. In the 90s, Islamist extremists started to exploit this discontent, and so some terrorist groups formed, who would come to carry out dozens of attacks across China. The Chinese government then responded by cracking down on perceived separatist and extremist activity. This has ramped up in the last 2 decades or so, leading to a lot of resentment from the population, leading to more unrest and terrorism, leading to harsher crackdowns. There's certainly something to be said here about how states tend to create the circumstances that lead to terrorism, and then react with anti-terrorism measures that spur even more terrorism. The USA's Middle Eastern interventions being another example. Finally, in 2014, China opened what it calls vocational education and training centers for de-radicalizing minorities in Xinjiang who are considered to be extremists. This program was then hugely expanded in 2017. These centers are at the core of claims of oppression and genocide in Xinjiang. The Chinese government says that they are vocational education and training centers where people accused of terrorism or extremism can go or be made to go to learn the error of their ways, alongside valuable skills to help them be integrated into so-called modern society. Detractors, however, claim that the centers are actually concentration camps which have much more nefarious aims behind them, ranging from forced assimilation of ethnic minority populations into Han Chinese culture to a mass physical genocide comparable with the Holocaust. A good starting point for our own investigation here is the official legal backing for these policies. So let's take a look at some of the relevant laws which have been translated by China Law Translate, a website which does what it says on the tin. Firstly, the 2015 nationwide anti-terrorism law. Now, most of this is pretty standard as far as anti-terrorism laws go, in line with similar laws that other countries have on the subject, but it does deviate near the end, where it branches out to include provisions not just against terrorism, but also extremism. Terrorism is already a very nebulous term, but it is at least generally associated with the intent to carry out one-time violence. Extremism, however, is even more nebulous and does not necessarily have an explicitly violent connotation, and this law's definition of it definitely doesn't. In Article 80, this law authorizes detention for 10 to 15 days for those who advocate for extremism, disseminate advocacy for extremism, where symbols that advocate for extremism or aid extremism, even where the circumstances are minor and do not constitute a crime. That right there provides a clear basis in Chinese law for detention without a crime actually being committed. This becomes even more worrying when we read that definition of extremism. Some of the things listed here as extremist are genuinely bad things, such as forcing people to participate in religious activities, but others are less clearly so, such as obstructing the lawful performance of duties by state organ personnel, which is so broad that it could be used to cover basically anyone who gets on the nerves of a state actor, or distorting or demeaning state policies, laws, or administrative regulations, or inciting or abetting the boycott of the lawful administration by the people's governments, which pretty clearly just outright states that criticizing government policies or laws constitutes extremism, or other acts of using extremism to obstruct the implementation of the national legal system, which is one of those classic, incredibly vague laws that's just completely open to interpretation, which could conveniently be used against basically anyone they feel like. In 2017, a new law was passed in Xinjiang specifically, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region Regulation on De-Extremification. This one goes far off the rails. It broadened the definition of extremism to encompass things like rejecting or refusing public goods and services such as radio and television. So if you don't want to consume state media, you're an extremist, and wearing or compelling others to wear burqas with face coverings or to bear symbols of extremification, making it very clear that these are targeted at Muslims specifically. And symbols of extremification, who even knows what that means? It's another vague provision that can be interpreted however officials want it to be. My favorite one, though, is definitely spreading religious fanaticism through irregular beards or name selection. So having an irregular beard is spreading extremism. Shit. And name selection, what does that even mean? Like, can you not name your kid Muhammad anymore? You know, the most common name in the entire world? And there's, of course, more of the classic, deliberately as vague as possible provisions in there. Other speech and acts of extremification. That could be literally anything, just like whatever they decide. This de-extremification regulation also provides compelling evidence, direct from the government's own mouths, that their intentions here might be a bit more nefarious. It states, for example, that every ethnic group shall study and follow the law and build identification with the great motherland, the Chinese people, Chinese culture, the Communist Party of China, and socialism with Chinese characteristics. And that de-extremification shall persist in an orientation of making religion more Chinese. Oh, okay then. I guess these minorities just aren't practicing their religion in a Chinese enough way, whatever that means, and so they need to be made to assimilate into the great motherland and identify with the governing party. At very best here, they clearly associate these minority cultures and the fact that they are quite different to the mainstream in China with extremism and terrorism. Otherwise, there will be no need to include things like that, exalting the need to make them more Chinese in a law that is specifically on extremism and terrorism. And at worst, they're just kind of openly stating their intent here in an official legal document to assimilate these minorities into what they consider Chinese national culture. If you had similar sort of stuff to this codified into law in any Western nation, as France has recently been doing, for example, most of the same people who do mental gymnastics to defend this would be up in arms. And rightfully so. But because China's doing it, it's suddenly okay. And for all the same reason that right-wingers in the West would use to justify such crackdowns too. This is right out of the far-right's wet dreams. The legally codified profiling of Muslims for having irregular beards and extremist names. The proud and open declaration in an official legal document that they should be made to assimilate into the great motherland, all in the name of fighting extremism and terrorism? They love that sort of stuff, which makes it all the more hilarious that they pretend to care about the plight of Muslims in China. But anyway, so there's some very questionable things in there, which could easily be used to justify the detention of basically anyone, even if they hadn't committed a crime, or with the clearly stated goal that they should be made to assimilate into wider Chinese culture. They're really not even trying to hide it at all. There's more evidence of these intentions from other Chinese government sources too. A couple of years ago, the chairman of Xinjiang, Shorat Zakir, was interviewed by Chinese state media, and he described these training centers as such. For those suspected of minor criminal offenses but do not have to be subject to penalties, or who can be exempted from criminal punishment, Xinjiang has provided them with free vocational training through vocational education institutions to improve their ability in commanding the country's common language, acquiring legal knowledge and vocational skills, among others. In that way, Xinjiang can better guard against the infiltration of terrorism and extremism. Doesn't sound so bad, right? But this is an official of the government giving an interview to state media, so it would be a big mistake to read this uncritically. And even with just a little bit of critical assessment of this passage, we can already see that he's kind of just saying the quiet part out loud. He considers the inability of minorities to communicate in the country's common language to be tied to terrorism and extremism, even if they're literally living in their home region where their language is the majority. Now, I'm sure that some of you are already rushing to the comments to defend this with whatever justification comes to mind. But before you do that, ask yourselves, if an equally high-level US government official said that, for example, monolingual Spanish or Arabic speakers were associated with drug dealing or terrorism or whatever, and said, hey, we're going to teach them English to combat this, would you be okay with it? Spoiler, the answer is no for most of you. You'd be up in arms about it, actually. There's much more to this interview, too. For example, he also states, the trainees will take learning the country's common language as the basis to improve their communication abilities, gain modern science knowledge, and enhance their understanding of Chinese history, culture, and national conditions. The teaching follows standardized plans, textbooks, materials, and systems. The trainees are taught in various methods suited to their literacy to raise their abilities to use the country's common language as soon as possible. Again, that's a government official in Xinjiang trying to paint what they're doing in the most rosy terms possible, using really positive language, etc., yet still just openly stating that a big part of the purpose for these training centers is to assimilate some of the ethnic minorities in Xinjiang into their idea of a wider Chinese culture. They must learn its language, its history, its culture, its national conditions, etc. Their perceived lack of association with the great motherland is itself taken to be a threat, which they associate with extremism. Otherwise, there'd be no reason to teach these sort of things in what is supposedly a de-extremification program. There is no reason that people could not be de-radicalized from their supposedly extremist thoughts without all of this stuff tacked on, unless said thoughts are specifically being associated with their ethnic identity. Now look, the Uyghur people have their own language, they have their own culture, and officially there's at least 12 million of them, more than the populations of certain countries that also have their own unique language, such as Armenia, for example. If they want to learn Mandarin, if they want to learn about the Chinese government's idea of Chinese national culture, that should be something that they voluntarily choose to do, rather than be forced or coerced into doing. Most of the people who are supportive of China's initiatives here would absolutely agree with that. For other places which also have distinct peoples in large nation states, especially in those of the Western Bloc, yet apparently here, it's a-okay for China to just openly state that they want to make a similarly distinct group of people living in their own homeland more Chinese. It's just picking and choosing whatever happens to be convenient for your own geopolitical bloc, not anything resembling a consistent set of principles. Just for good measure, here's another government document where the same sorts of intentions are laid out once more. This one is a Ministry of Education document from 2017. You can tell that it's authentic because it was archived from their official website. It states the government's intent to get more ethnic minority children in Xinjiang into boarding schools, and says that these boarding schools should produce a good study environment for studying Mandarin and the full use of Mandarin in the campus environment, popularize Chinese classical literature and poetry, Mandarin language radio, and Mandarin songs. Beijing Standard Time should be used on campus, and students should form a conscious commitment to learning the national language. That is glorious. Wow, how glorious. Now, it seems like kind of a weird coincidence to me that a document from 2017, which is the year when the oppression in Xinjiang is purported to have ramped up, outlines plans to put more minority children into boarding schools and have them immersed in Chinese culture. It's even weirder when you consider that boarding schools are the perfect avenue for this sort of thing, since students live there full-time and are thus entirely removed from their home environments, making them ripe to have a new culture imposed upon them without any influence from their parents or relatives. And that is specifically why many countries have used boarding schools to do exactly that in the past, especially in regards to assimilating indigenous people, such as in Canada, for example, where the practice is widely considered to have constituted a cultural genocide. It would also be quite a bit more suspicious if Chinese government documents actually show clearly that this plan was actually put into practice, and that in just 2 years, the number of students in Xinjiang's boarding schools increased astronomically from almost 500,000 in 2017 to almost 900,000 in 2019, which they absolutely do show, by the way. The fact of the matter here is that the Chinese government has been very open with their intentions to make ethnic minorities in Xinjiang more Chinese, and their very broad anti-extremism definition that was very clearly made to profile Muslim minorities gives them the perfect legal means to target basically whoever they want to. We've yet to really get into the meat of the alleged concentration camps though. So what are they actually for in practice? Is attendance voluntary, coercive, or forced? How many people exactly are in or have been in them? The Chinese government has always been quite open about their existence, so the question is one of whether they are a benevolent institution or a malicious one. Let's check out a different Chinese state media source for their view on the issue. This article from the Global Times. The social situation in Xinjiang is stable. People of all ethnic groups have a stable mentality and are optimistic about the future of Xinjiang. All undertakings are proceeding in an orderly manner. The people live and work in peace and contentment, and the trend is getting better and better. Wow, sounds totally great and perfect. Everyone adores the government's policies and nothing bad is happening at all. This is definitely not incredibly transparent propaganda that sounds like a more articulate Donald Trump. But hey, let's read on. The interference of external forces stimulates the unity consciousness of the people of all ethnic groups in Xinjiang. The current changes there are not only the complete reversal of the social security situation and the fast track of economic development, but also the profound changes in people's minds and understanding. The people of all ethnic groups in Xinjiang have come to realize that Xinjiang's development cannot be separated from ethnic unity, and the leadership of the Communist Party of China is the fundamental guarantee for Xinjiang's prosperity and development. People of all ethnic groups have been strengthening their identification with the Great Motherland, the Chinese nation, Chinese culture, the Communist Party of China, and socialism with Chinese characteristics. So, more ridiculously over-the-top propaganda that no one could possibly read without feeling like their intelligence is being insulted. Everyone in Xinjiang loves the government so much and wants to personally kiss Xi Jinping on the lips. But as you probably already noticed, that passage is still footnoted with something that's very revealing. The exact same refrain about assimilation and how great it is that ethnic minorities be made to identify with the Great Motherland. So yeah, I think it's definitely fair to say, based on these 4 Chinese government sources, which all say the exact same sort of thing, that a big part of the intent behind China's Xinjiang policies is to instill a sense of identification with the Chinese government, culture, nation, language, etc. in ethnic minorities, and that their ethnic minority identities are considered to be something of a problem, which makes them predisposed to extremism. They can try to frame this positively as much as they want, couching it in overly verbose, rosy language. It's still just obvious as hell. This is the sort of stuff that settler colonists would write in the 19th century about how to fix the Indian problem. And as I've noted about half a dozen times already, and this won't be the last time, most of the people who approve of or make excuses for this would be absolutely up in arms about anything resembling it in a country that they deem a part of the enemy camp. It's different, okay? This is the People's War on Terror, and these are the people's residential schools. So, is the intent behind this vocational training really benevolent? Obviously not. Still, intent does not necessarily mean action. You know, maybe despite this, they're still not really doing anything bad. After all, Chinese state media has presented evidence of some people who have been in these purported education centers and who seem to have had a positive experience, alongside others who deny claims that they were ever even there, like this one who was interviewed by the Chinese state media agency CGTN.
I learned legal knowledge and Chinese here. I will find a stable job and have a family after graduation. It's better for my children this way.
Or this woman who debunked rumors being spread by her supposed daughter that she had been imprisoned.
Claiming to be an imam to his daughter and said her mother was put in these education camps. Recently there has been some videos on the internet going viral saying that you have been missing, saying that you have been in this re-education camps in Xinjiang. Is that true?
Yeah.
Enemy UAV inbound.
Looks like the vocational training centers are actually amazing, and all the lies about them have been debunked. Or maybe we can stop and think about this for a second. Let's say 100% hypothetically that you were unjustly detained by your government, and news of this was then spread on social media. Then, after your release, government media shows up at your house. They surround you with cameras, microphones, lighting, etc., and ask you to confirm or deny if that really happened. Your options there would be to acknowledge that it happened, which could put you in further danger for no good reason, as they would obviously just edit out your segment in the final product. Or you could just say what they want you to say, avoid the risk of repercussions, and maybe even get them off your back entirely. If the allegations against China were remotely true, then that would be exactly what's happening here. The government, the alleged perpetrator, not only has complete editorial control over this content, but also complete control over the fates of the alleged victims. The same alleged victims who it is interviewing itself to prove its own innocence. It's a situation with levels of coercive potential that just go off the charts. Even in the seemingly unlikely event that everything being said in these clips is 100% true, that would be impossible to deduce from them because they've already been irrevocably tainted by the dynamic here. And that's even assuming that these people aren't just outright being told what to say, which is also a very real possibility here. And the tours that the Chinese government gives to visiting journalists in Xinjiang make the possibility that they are not exercising coercive control of the narrative here seem pretty unlikely, to say the least. Here's some clips of a tour that was given to journalists from the BBC. Now, the BBC is an incredibly biased Western media institution. Nonetheless, this is still a real tour of these purported camps that they were given by the Chinese state. So it's a valuable resource. We're going to ignore the BBC's obviously biased commentary and rather just examine the visuals and what's said to educational. There's a lot of conflicting was happening in the Chinese government's exact same sort of words, but in another country, the outright deniers of what's going on in Xinjiang should strengthen the guidance to assimilate them into all the relatively developed.
Hey there, I'm taking a shit right now, and as I was scrolling, I noticed a big story. McDonald's got the permission to finally start fixing their ice cream machines. So The Copyright Office concluded that they have the
I think, you know, I don't know what the internal drama is with Aiden Ross, and I don't know what the internal drama is with Aiden Ross and Kick and Steak, but like the years that he spent on Kick, he did so much. I mean, he did so much to his own brand. Aiden is coming back, it seems. There's actually been some drama in the past few months between the CEO of Kick / Steak and Aiden. I'll be making a full video on why I'm leaving Kick indefinitely. I'm stepping down officially, and I will be going into detail about this week. I will tell you all everything. With that being said, I'm going to fully focus on being reinstated on Twitch. Thank you. I think Aiden has a long way to go if he wants to get, like, I have no say in this process, obviously, but I think Aiden has a long way to go if he is making a good faith effort. But he has done so much over the past year when he was at Kick. Like, his community is so, like, he needs to literally purge his community. He needs to literally purge his community. There's so many vicious, anti-Semitic, like, psychos in his community. Like, it's not even, like, it's not going to be easy, man. That shit takes, is probably some personal grievance over anything moral. His community, you mean him? No, I'm saying even if he was like taking a good faith effort and like legitimately trying to change his ways, it's a long way to go. Do you think the kickback is drying up? Probably. I don't fucking know. Like, it's just, his community is so fucking vicious. Like, so toxic, so vicious, like, straight up. This is absolutely the type of shit. This is absolutely the type of shit like Twitch cares about in terms of like terms of service. Like, they don't play around with that. I know everybody loves like a story, like a comeback story or whatever. What is this? Oh man, he wouldn't be on Kick without me. I built Kick through Bruce, which brought Rage, XT, etc. Westcall, you should not be so disrespectful to your daddy Aiden Ross like that. You had that bot to beat my Donald Trump stream. They are using you as a stake funnel, my boy. Also, you get paid a month when I make a stream. Respect your father. Yeah, I think it's a weird precedent. I think it's a weird precedent to just be like, look, I love rehabilitation. You guys know this. And I love it to a point where people get very mad at me and say I'm far too charitable to those who are not deserving of charity. Having said that, however, I think, you know, I don't know what the internal drama is with Aiden Ross, and I don't know what the internal drama is with Aiden Ross and Kick and Steak, but like the years that he spent on Kick, he did so much. I mean, he did so much to his own brand. He did so much reputational damage, and also simultaneously, he just like leaned so far into unimaginable far-right content, collaborating with like straight up Holocaust deniers and shit, you know what I mean? It's crazy. And it was poison. It was poison from the jump. This is something that I very clearly called out years ahead of time, okay? This is something that I called out years ahead of time. When it was first forming, when Kick was first forming, I said, not having any sort of terms of service application is going to make this platform a space for and Nazis, right? And people yelled at me for it. I said that Kick was a cutout for Steak. I said that Kick was a carve out for Steak so that they could do cryptocurrency
enemy RCXD detected
sponsorships and use it as a funnel to move a bunch of people into, you know, getting a lifelong crippling addiction. But not only did that happen, but also on top of that, there were so many like insane like neo-Nazi content creators that popped off. And I would say that Kick in and of itself damaged the entire streaming space because of all of the visibility of the crazy, insane shit that Kick streamers were doing. That literally made people hate streaming even further, which was already, you know, there was already a lot of valid reasons to hate streamers. We're out of touch, we're rich, we're spoiled, You know, all we do is sit in front of a fucking computer and make a shit ton of money. But Kick definitely didn't help. You know what I mean? All the clips that Steak was paying for, the entire clip farming Twitter ecosystem that was created, that also happened to be the Hassan ecosystem on Twitter as well. That serializing, harassing people, having metas like, you know, creating CSAM, like all of this stuff. Yeah, Johnny Somali did entire nations. It's just so bad. It's just so bad across the board. And you also used to say that you wanted it to succeed for a competition against Twitch before the insane levels of shit on there. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind. I don't mind having like healthy competition in the streaming space because it's good for streamers and it's good for the watchers as well.
On top of that, I do wish you well on Kick. I really do, because I want a competitor.
This is from March 20th, 2023. Hassan having debates, Train Race TV.
I want a competitor to Twitch because I think that would make the platforms overall better. But make no mistake, ironically, you started off talking about how you hated how much streamers or hot tub streamers and the meta was awful, and now you got porn on your platform. Now you got one of your main poster boys at Kick showing porn to minors. So maybe you now recognize the importance of moderation, especially as it pertains to an overall platform.
Wait. Let me respond to that. First of all, me going on rants about streamers 4 years ago or however long ago that was.
Oh, your positions have changed?
Oh, so have positions changed?
Oh, no, I love that. I love that.
Can you change?
Yeah, of course, it's changed. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Okay. I'm glad.
Okay.
But I don't think your positions have changed so much that you think it's okay to show minors, right? I don't think that's the case, right?
Of course not. That's definitely.
Anyway, the classic 2v1, I was there. Yeah, this was fun stuff. Who was the streamer showing content to minors? Oh, it was Aiden Ross. We got the Wikipedia page for socialism up on the side, too.
Weird as hell for him to do that, but to bring it from the
How many days did he get banned for that off of Kick? How many days did Aiden Ross get banned off Kick for that?
That's not in my power, but I push for it all the.
Wait, what? If we care about anti-Semitism, and I know we do, we need to stay away from Bassem Youssef. Please don't give more ammunition by having a genuinely anti-Semitic person on stream who Paris conspiracies about Jewish media control and the libel against Leo Frank. Wait, what? Really? Bassem Youssef is like a liberal, dude. I thought Bassem. What? I am completely unaware of this. If he's done stuff like that, I didn't personally like how much he was like joking around with you know, Dave Bilzerian, who I do think is like an actual anti-Semite. But I don't think Bassem Youssef is. I'd be shocked. Yeah, I think like the shit that he does, the shit that he on Theo Von, he talked about Jews going to the media, and then on Twitter about Leo Frank stuff. Wait, what the fuck? I did not know this at all, chatter. Holy shit. He retweeted one thing that was bad. What is this? After a Leo Frank rant that recycled anti-Semitic tropes and sounded almost like Candace Owens, who's gone deep into the anti-Semitic territory. I hope that Mendy Hassan is a terrible Boston uses from the list of affiliated contributors. What is this? Tomorrow marks 109 years since Leo Frank was in Georgia. Wait, what?
Neutralized. We're winning. Keep it that way.
Stone requesting Watchdog Elo on my grid.
We've given up the lead. Space kill team. They were better than
Crimson.
today.
We need to fade.
So guys, I think by now everyone has heard of the old Hop 2 scam. The crypto rug pull done by Haley Welch, America's sweetheart. She got famous for making a joke, the old Hawk2 spitting on that thing joke, because that's definitely something you want to be famous for as a young lady. You know, making a joke about sloppy BJs. It's very, very endearing. I'm sure her family loves that she is now the Hawk2 sloppy BJ girl.
Come on.
But Hawk2 girl, the whole scam that she did with her Hawk coin. It blew up over the past week. I think it was on Wednesday. It was on Wednesday, I think, when it went live. And now